Hello, guys, welcome back to another story. Today's story is a little different because we're diving into Greek mythology, real romance with love, obsession, comedy, heartbreak, and emotions that might genuinely make you cry. If I made any mistakes regarding Greek mythology, please bear with me. This is the first mythology based story on my channel, and I really tried my best to bring this story to life. And I hope you enjoy it as much as I enjoyed creating it. Now, what happens when the god of war falls hopelessly in love with the one being he was never meant to keep? Asterion, the god of war, has spent thousands of years maintaining divine order until Eryx, the beautiful, shameless menace of Olympus, turns his perfectly controlled world upside down. But when Eryx begins to fade, Asterion discovers a horrifying truth. His beloved was born to die. Will Asterion accept the will of the gods and the faith, or declares war on the universe itself to keep his chaos alive? Because when destiny demands Eryx's life, Asterion is willing to sacrifice eternity. And before we dive in, don't forget to check out my Patreon for early access, exclusive content, and stories that you may no longer find on YouTube. And with that, let's dive into Olympus and begin our story.
Chapter 1. The God Who Hated Chaos. Asterion had lived for thousands of years according to one principle: order. Golden hair, golden eyes, and a presence that could silence an entire battlefield. Asterion was the god of the sun, war, and divine order. He rose with the dawn, trained with the warriors, listened to mortal prayers, settled divine disputes, and ensured that Olympus remained exactly as it should. Disciplined, predictable, peaceful. Unfortunately, there had always been one exception: Eryx. No one in Olympus knew where Eryx had come from. He had simply appeared one day when they were children. A beautiful little menace with silver black hair, enormous violet eyes, and an alarming talent for getting into places he absolutely shouldn't have been. And somehow, everyone adored him. Zeus let him sit on his throne. Hera secretly fed him honey cakes. Apollo allowed him to steal his lyre. Dionysus gave him wine despite repeatedly being told not to. Even Athena, who valued wisdom above almost everything, had once been caught teaching Eryx how to cheat at strategy games. Eryx was spoiled, completely and shamelessly spoiled, and Asterion had grown up beside him. When Eryx climbed trees, Asterion stood beneath them in case he fell. When Eryx wandered into dangerous forests, Asterion followed. When Eryx got caught stealing something, Asterion somehow appeared before anyone could punish him. When Eryx cried, Asterion was always the first person beside him. Nobody questioned it. They were simply Asterion and Eryx, the disciplined prince of sunlight and the beautiful little disaster who followed him everywhere. But somewhere along the centuries, something changed. Asterion's protectiveness became possessiveness. He simply hid it very, very well, or so he thought. The morning everything became ridiculous began with Hermes screaming. Not a dignified divine shout. Not a warrior's cry. A full-blown, "Who stole my sandals?" Asterion slowly looked toward Olympus's gardens. A flock of peacocks came flying over the marble walls. Each one was wearing one of Hermes's winged sandals. Asterion closed his eyes. No! One sandal landed inside his sacred war pavilion, then another. Then 3 peacocks crashed through the roof. Asterion's eye twitched. He marched outside, golden spear in hand. Who did this? A familiar laugh answered him. Asterion looked up. There, sitting casually on a fallen marble pillar, was Eryx. Silver black hair falling around his pale face, violet eyes sparkling with mischief, bare feet dangling over the edge, a stolen nectar peach in his hand. He looked exactly the same as he had when they were children. Beautiful. Troublesome. And entirely too pleased with himself. Eryx took another bite. Hello, sunshine. Asterion froze. Nobody else called him that. Nobody except Eryx. Of course. Why are Hermes' sandals attached to peacocks? Eryx glanced at the birds, then at him. Fashion. You destroyed my pavilion. Technically, the peacocks did. You tied the sandals to them. Technically, Hermes' sandals did. Asterion's golden eyes narrowed. Eryx smiled innocently. Asterion knew that smile. He had known it since childhood. It meant trouble. Give them back. No. Eryx, say please. Asterion stared at him. Eryx stared back. A beat passed. Then another. Finally, Eryx hopped down from the pillar and walked toward him. Asterion expected another joke. Instead, Eryx reached up and brushed a stray golden lock from his forehead. "You're way too pretty to look this grumpy, sunshine." Asterion stopped breathing. For a moment, the gardens became strangely quiet. Then Eryx smiled and walked away. Asterion remained frozen. One of his soldiers cautiously approached. "Lord Asterion?" "Yes?" "Should we arrest him?" Asterion watched Eryx disappear behind the trees. "No." The soldier hesitated. "Should we retrieve the sandals?" "No." "The peacocks?" "No." "Your pavilion?" Asterion's eye twitched. "Later." The soldier wisely left. Because everyone knew the truth. Asterion could tolerate Eryx destroying almost anything. Except perhaps his own hair. That was apparently where the line was drawn. From that day onward, Asterion began appearing wherever Eryx went. Eryx stole Apollo's lyre. Asterion was there. Eryx convinced Dionysus that Zeus had banned wine. Asterion was there. Eryx snuck into Athena's library. Asterion was there. Eryx sold Poseidon's sacred trident to a mortal fisherman for 3 figs. Asterion was, "Give me my trident." Poseidon thundered. Eryx ran. Asterion sighed and followed. Eventually, Hera cornered him. "You followed Eryx to the mortal world 3 times this week." "I was inspecting the temples." "You were hiding behind a tree." "A strategically positioned tree." Hera stared at him. "You've been like this since you were children." Asterion's expression remained perfectly calm. "I am responsible for him." "You are obsessed with him." "I am not." "You know his favorite fruit." Silence. "His favorite wine." Silence. "Where he goes when he's upset." Asterion looked away. "And exactly how long he can remain quiet before causing trouble." Asterion frowned. "That's common knowledge." Hera sighed. "You're hopeless." Asterion said nothing. Because there was something Hera didn't know, something nobody knew. Asterion had always been possessive of Eryx, even as children. Even when Eryx would run laughing toward the other gods. Even when everyone spoiled him. Even when Eryx disappeared for days and returned with another stolen artifact. Asterion had always been there. Waiting, watching, protecting. And somewhere deep inside, an ancient, terrifying thought had quietly taken root. Eryx was his to protect. Not because Eryx belonged to him, but because Asterion couldn't imagine a world where he wasn't there for him. Then came the day Eryx decided that being a menace wasn't enough. He wanted a promotion, so he stole Zeus's crown, sat upon Zeus's throne, crossed one leg over the other, and announced, "I am now king of Olympus." Zeus stared at him. Hera covered her face. Apollo was already laughing. Asterion walked into the throne room. He took one look at Eryx, then at the crown, then at Zeus. Zeus pointed furiously. "Your problem." Asterion sighed. "Eryx, no. Give me the crown." "No." "Eryx, say please." Asterion's golden eyes narrowed. Eryx grinned. Then Asterion simply walked forward, picked him up, and threw him over his shoulder. Eryx's violet eyes widened. "Asterion!" The entire throne room erupted into laughter. "Put me down." "No. I am your king. You are a nuisance. I'll curse your entire bloodline." "I don't have one." "I'll curse your hair." Asterion immediately stopped walking. "Don't." Eryx burst into laughter. "I knew it." Asterion continued carrying him away. Behind them, Zeus quietly reclaimed his throne. Hera shook her head. Apollo whispered, "Do you think Asterion realizes he's in love with him?" Hera watched the golden-haired god disappear down the corridor, with Eryx still struggling over his shoulder. "Oh, he knows." A pause. "He simply hasn't admitted it yet." And perhaps that was the greatest problem. Because Asterion had spent thousands of years mastering war, controlling the sun, and maintaining divine order. Yet the one thing he could never control was Eryx. And the terrifying part? He wasn't sure he wanted to. Chapter 2. The beautiful menace begins to fade. For centuries, Olympus had learned to live with 2 things: the rising sun and Eryx's trouble. Eryx stole Zeus's crown. Asterion retrieved it. Eryx stole it again. Asterion eventually stopped retrieving it. Zeus bought a second crown. Eryx stole that one too. "You know," Zeus complained one afternoon staring at the empty throne, I'm beginning to think this is personal. It is, Eryx replied cheerfully from the balcony. Zeus groaned. Asterion, standing nearby, simply closed his eyes. Nothing about Eryx had changed. At least that was what everyone pretended. He was still mischievous, still shameless, still stealing whatever wasn't nailed down, still calling Asterion sunshine purely because he knew it irritated him. But slowly, so slowly that nobody dared admit they had noticed, Eryx began to grow tired. At first, it was nothing. A yawn here, a missed meal there. A few afternoons spent sleeping beneath the olive trees instead of terrorizing Olympus. Nobody said anything. Perhaps they were afraid. Perhaps they already knew. Because Eryx was still Eryx. He laughed. He joked. He stole Apollo's lyre and hid it inside Zeus's bedroom. He once convinced Dionysus that ambrosia had been replaced with fermented olives. Everyone laughed. Everyone pampered him. Everyone treated him exactly as they always had. Yet, sometimes, Eryx would suddenly become quiet. And when Eryx became quiet, Olympus felt wrong. The laughter disappeared. The halls seemed colder. Even the gods found themselves glancing toward him, waiting for that familiar mischievous smile to return. Asterion noticed every time. He never said anything. He simply moved closer, sat beside him, placed a hand against his back, stayed. Because Asterion had known Eryx since childhood, he knew the difference between Eryx being bored and Eryx being afraid. And lately, Eryx had begun looking afraid. One morning, they were in the celestial gardens. Eryx had attacked Asterion without warning. Again, they rolled through the grass, Eryx laughing as he tried to steal Asterion's golden spear. Give it back. No. Eryx, catch me. Asterion caught him. Eryx squeaked as Asterion pinned his wrist gently above his head. Got you. Cheater. You started it. I always start it. Eryx laughed. Then his laughter faded. Asterion felt something touch his golden bracer. He glanced down. A faint handprint shimmered against the metal. Not blood, not sweat, dust, tiny particles of glowing gold. Asterion's smile disappeared. Eryx. What is this? Eryx looked down. For one brief second, the laughter vanished from his face. Fear flashed through his violet eyes. Then he smiled again. Probably glitter. Asterion stared at him. Divine glitter. You don't glitter. I could. You hate glitter. Eryx's smile faltered. You're really ruining my explanation. Asterion said nothing. The dust slipped from his bracer. It vanished into the wind. But the cold feeling in Asterion's chest remained. He helped Eryx stand. Neither spoke about it. Yet from that day onward, Asterion watched him more closely. He noticed everything. How Eryx sometimes stared at his hands as if checking that they were still there. How he occasionally rubbed his chest when he thought nobody was looking. How his laughter sometimes sounded forced. How he became exhausted after using magic, and how, whenever Asterion asked if he was all right, Eryx smiled. Always smiled. I'm fine, sunshine. Asterion knew he was lying. He simply didn't know why. Then came the forgetting. It began with small things. Eryx forgot the name of his favorite mortal friend. He laughed about it. Perhaps the poor thing wasn't memorable. Asterion didn't laugh. Then Eryx forgot a prank he'd once played on Apollo. Then the taste of his favorite wine. Then a song he had sung for centuries. Each time Eryx joked. Each time the gods laughed with him. But their laughter became quieter, more fragile, as though everyone was pretending not to hear something breaking. Then one afternoon, Eryx found Asterion beneath their favorite olive tree. He sat beside him, quietly. For a while, neither spoke. Then Eryx looked at him. His violet eyes were strangely empty. Have we met before? Asterion stopped breathing. The world seemed to tilt. For one terrible second, he couldn't understand the words. Then Eryx saw his face. Immediately, he laughed. God, sunshine! Your face! He nudged Asterion's shoulder. I'm joking. Asterion stared at him. He knew that laugh. He knew every expression Eryx had ever worn. He knew when Eryx was lying, and that hesitation before the joke Asterion had seen it. Eryx hadn't remembered him, not for a moment. Asterion's hands curled into fists beneath his robes. He wanted to grab Eryx, hold him, demand an answer from the universe itself. Instead, He simply reached over and brushed a strand of silver-black hair away from Eryx's face. "You're an idiot." Eryx smiled. "You're idiot?" Asterion's heart broke, but his face remained calm. "Unfortunately," Eryx laughed, then leaned against his shoulder. Within minutes, he fell asleep. Asterion didn't move, not even when his arm went numb. He simply sat there holding Eryx against him, watching him breathe. Because suddenly, breathing had become something Asterion needed to make sure Eryx continued doing. And then Asterion began noticing something else. The gods. Hera still fed Eryx honeycakes. Apollo still let him steal the lyre. Dionysus still poured him wine. Zeus still pretended to be furious whenever Eryx stole his crown. Everyone still pampered him. Everyone still smiled. But their eyes were different. Whenever Eryx wasn't looking, their smiles disappeared. Hera would look at him with unbearable sadness. Apollo would turn away whenever Eryx laughed too loudly. Dionysus would quietly refill Eryx's cup before it became empty. Even Zeus stopped scolding him properly, and Hades, who rarely showed emotion at all, once watched Eryx sleeping in the garden for nearly an hour. Asterion saw all of it. Every stolen glance, every swallowed tear, every silent goodbye. He said nothing, not a single word. Because while everyone else was mourning, something dark, ancient, and utterly feral was freezing over inside Asterion's chest. They knew, they all knew, and they were hiding it from him. Why? What could possibly make immortal gods look at Eryx as though they were already mourning him? What cruel, cosmic law had condemned the only person Asterion had ever loved to a silent, unpreventable death? That evening, Asterion found Eryx asleep in Hera's garden. Hera was sitting beside him. Her fingers moved gently through Eryx's silver-black hair. She looked almost like a mother soothing a child, touching him with the desperate reverence of someone trying to memorize a texture they would never feel again. Eryx slept peacefully. For once, there was no mischievous smile, no stolen crown, no sarcastic remark, just a beautiful, quiet face. Too quiet. Asterion stopped at the edge of the garden, his golden eyes fixed on him. For one horrifying moment, he imagined the garden without Eryx. The empty chair, the empty bed, the empty halls. No laughter, no violet eyes, no annoying voice calling him sunshine. Nothing. His chest tightened and felt like his chest tore open. The agony was so absolute, so suffocating, that it felt as though his immortality was being ripped out of him piece by piece. Asterion tried to bury it, tried to force the disciplined, emotionless god of war back to the surface. He did not fear. He did not break. He did not beg. Asterion immediately buried the feeling. He was the god of war. He did not fear. He did not tremble. He did not beg. But when he walked toward Eryx, his hands were shaking. He hid them inside his sleeves. Hera heard him coming. She didn't turn around, but her hand paused in Eryx's hair. Asterion stopped beside her, his voice a low, gravelly whisper that sounded like grinding stones. What is happening to him? Hera's fingers slowly continued stroking Eryx's hair. You've noticed. I notice everything about him. Asterion hissed, the calm facade finally splintering. He dropped to his knees beside the bench, catching Eryx's limp hand in his own. It felt impossibly light, like holding smoke. A pause. Tell me. Hera looked at him. For the first time, she didn't look annoyed by Eryx's chaos. She looked heartbroken. Asterion's voice became quieter. Tell me what you're hiding. Tell me, why is he forgetting everything? Asterion's voice cracked, a raw, jagged sound tearing from his throat. Why is his strength leaving him? Why does everyone look at him like he's already dead? Hera's eyes returned to Eryx. She gently brushed his hair away from his sleeping face. He doesn't know. Asterion's jaw tightened. Know what? Hera didn't answer, but her eyes filled with tears. Asterion's heart sank. He gripped Eryx's hand tighter, pressing it against his own face as if trying to warm him with his own immortal fire. Mother, he whispered, and for the first time in millennia, there was a plea in his voice. Tell me. Hera finally looked at him and whispered, Don't fall any deeper. Asterion stared at her. What? Hera looked down at Eryx. Her fingers trembled against his hair. He was never meant to stay. Asterion went completely still. The words echoed through the garden like a falling anchor. never meant to stay. He looked at Eryx, the beautiful menace who had been beside him since childhood, the boy who had stolen his first spear, the menace who had climbed into his bed during thunderstorms when they were young and pretended he wasn't frightened, the fool who had followed him everywhere, the person Asterion had quietly protected for thousands of years. Eryx shifted in his sleep. His fingers reached blindly toward Asterion. Asterion immediately took his hand, gripping him with fierce, desperate, possessive strength, as though holding his hand tightly enough, refusing to let go, could physically anchor him to the earth and keep him from blowing away in the wind. Eryx relaxed. His fingers curled around Asterion's. Asterion stared down at their joined hands. His golden eyes burned. He didn't cry. He wouldn't. Hera watched him silently, a deep, shuddering terror washing over her face as she saw what lived in Asterion's eyes. Asterion slowly lifted his head. The golden light in his eyes had completely vanished, replaced by a dark, fathomless void. All the grief, all the panic, all the breaking pieces of his heart compressed into something dense, heavy, and lethal. When he spoke, his voice wasn't loud. It was a soft, deadly murmur that made the very leaves on the olive trees stop trembling. Then whoever decided that... He leaned down, pressing his forehead gently against Eryx's cold hand. His jaw locked so hard it could crush stone. Made a mistake. Hera's expression changed, because she knew that look, the same look Asterion wore before going to war. And for the first time, the gods of Olympus should have been afraid. Not because Eryx was fading, but because Asterion had finally realized someone was taking him away, and they should have been terrified of what Asterion was going to do to keep him. Chapter 3. The God Who Declared War on Fate. Asterion refused to accept it. For the first time in thousands of years, the god of war stood before the gods of Olympus and said the words he had hidden even from himself. I love him. Silence. Asterion looked around. Nobody looked surprised. Hera simply lowered her eyes. Apollo sighed. Dionysus quietly wiped his face. Even Zeus looked away. Asterion frowned. You all knew? Hera gave him a sad smile. We knew before you did. He said nothing, because suddenly everything made sense. They hadn't been merely pampering Eryx. They had been cherishing every remaining moment with him, their beautiful little menace, their troublemaker, their spoiled child, their family, and they had known that one day they might lose him. Asterion turned away. No. His voice was quiet. I won't let that happen. He broke into the forbidden archiferum of the primordials that same night. He shattered divine seals, fought blind oracles, walked through corridors no living god was permitted to enter. By the time he reached the deepest chamber, half the walls were burning with golden divine fire. An ancient obsidian urn waited in the center. Asterion opened it. Inside was a single tablet covered in primordial blood. He read, and his entire world collapsed. Eryx had never been meant to live. He had been born from chaos and the dying breath of a collapsing star. Not a god, not a mortal, not a creature of Tartarus, a temporary being, a living eraser. His purpose had been simple: absorb the excess chaos of creation, cause disruption, consume disorder, until the universe finally reached perfect peace. And once that purpose was complete, Eryx would cease to exist. Every prank, every act of destruction, every stolen artifact, every disruption he had ever caused, had been slowly bringing him closer to his end. Asterion's fingers trembled. No. A blind oracle stood behind him. It cannot be changed. Asterion looked up. His golden eyes were burning. Everything can be changed. The fates have decreed. I didn't ask what the fates decreed. He stepped closer. I asked how to stop them. The oracle said nothing, and Asterion understood. There was no answer, so he would create one. When he returned to Eryx, he said nothing. Instead, he became unbearable. He followed Eryx everywhere, stopped him from using magic, carried him whenever he became tired, refused to let him travel alone. Whenever Eryx coughed, Asterion appeared. Whenever Eryx stumbled, Asterion caught him. Whenever Eryx slept, Asterion stayed beside him. Finally, Eryx snapped. Stop treating me like I'm dying. Asterion froze. Eryx froze too. The garden suddenly felt unbearably quiet. Why are you looking at me like that? Asterion couldn't lie anymore. Because you are. Eryx's smile disappeared. What? Asterion stepped toward him. You've been forgetting things. Silence. The golden dust. Eryx's eyes widened. The exhaustion. Eryx. The way your body disappears a little more every time you use your magic. Eryx's lips trembled. Asterion's voice broke. I know. The truth finally came out. The prophecy. The living eraser. The purpose, the countdown, the end. Eryx listened without interrupting. When Asterion finished, Eryx simply laughed. It was a tiny broken sound. So, he looked down at his hands. So that's why everyone kept looking at me like that. Asterion's chest tightened. Eryx laughed again. Zeus! His voice trembled. Hera. He swallowed. Apollo. Dionysus. Hades. His eyes filled with tears. They all knew. Asterion took his hand. They love you. Eryx looked at him. Then why didn't anyone tell me? Because they wanted you to live without fear. Eryx's lips trembled. How cruel. He laughed through his tears. They gave me happiness. His voice cracked. While knowing it had an expiration date, Asterion pulled him closer. You aren't dying. Eryx shook his head. You can't stop it. I will. You can't fight the universe. I'll fight it anyway. Tears finally slipped down Eryx's cheeks. Why? Asterion stared at him. Because suddenly, immortality seemed meaningless. What was eternity worth if Eryx wasn't in it? What was an endless life worth if he had to spend it alone? Asterion had spent thousands of years believing immortality was a blessing. Now he understood it could be a punishment. He tightened his grip on Eryx's hand. Because I love you. Eryx went completely still. Asterion's voice broke. And I refuse to exist in a world where you don't. He pressed his forehead against Eryx's. If you disappear, his breath shook. I'll disappear with you. Eryx's tears fell faster. You're an idiot. I know. You'll lose everything. I don't care. You'll lose Olympus. I don't care. Your divinity. I don't care. Your immortality. Asterion looked directly into his violet eyes. I don't want immortality without you. Then the fates came. There was no thunder, no great battle cry, just silence. Eryx suddenly gasped. His body flickered. Asterion caught him. Eryx! His hands were disappearing, not bleeding, not breaking, simply becoming translucent. Eryx! His legs began fading next. His silver-black hair scattered into glowing particles. Asterion held him tighter. The gods gathered around them. Hera covered her mouth. Apollo was openly crying. Dionysus turned away, shoulders shaking. Even Zeus couldn't hide his tears. Their beautiful menace was disappearing. The child they had all spoiled. The troublemaker who had stolen their possessions. The little disaster who had made Olympus laugh for thousands of years. Eryx looked at them. I'm sorry. Hera broke. No. She rushed forward. Don't you dare apologize. Eryx smiled weakly. I caused so much trouble. Apollo laughed through his tears. That isn't something to apologize for. Dionysus wiped his eyes. You were the only one who made Olympus fun. Even Zeus's voice trembled. You still owe me 2 crowns. Eryx laughed, a genuine laugh, but it lasted only a moment. His body faded further. Asterion held him desperately. Eryx whispered, Let me go, sunshine. No. I was made to fade. I don't care. You'll lose everything. I already lose everything if I lose you. Eryx began crying. I don't want you to destroy yourself for me. Asterion pressed his forehead against his. Then stay. I can't? Then I'll change the rules. Asterion carried him to the primordial rift, the birthplace of chaos, the place where even gods feared to tread. The void opened before them. Cosmic scales appeared. Asterion placed everything upon them. His immortality, his divine authority, his temples, his power, his soul. The scales remained unbalanced. They demanded more. Asterion stared at Eryx. His beloved was almost transparent now. Only his face remained completely solid. His violet eyes looked exhausted. Terrified. Asterion whispered, Forgive me. Eryx's eyes widened. For what? Asterion placed a hand over his own chest and shattered his sun core. Golden light exploded through the void. Asterion, Eryx screamed. The god of war wrapped his arms around him. Hold on to me. Don't do this to yourself for me. I'll stop you from disappearing. You're destroying yourself. I don't care. Sunshine. I said hold on. Eryx's fingers desperately clutched Asterion's golden robes. His body was almost completely transparent. The cosmic scales trembled. Chaos roared. The heavens shook. Asterion's golden blood streamed into the void. His divine light poured into Eryx, but Eryx was still fading. Asterion's heart shattered. He held him tighter. Please. It was the first time the god of war had ever begged. Please stay. Eryx looked at him. Really looked at him. At the god willing to sacrifice everything. At the golden hair now streaked with silver. At the trembling hands that refused to release him. And finally Eryx smiled. It was small, beautiful, heartbreakingly sad. I'm scared. Asterion's voice cracked. I know. I don't want to die. And there it was. The one thing Asterion had desperately wanted to hear. Not because he wanted Eryx to fear death, but because Eryx had finally admitted that he wanted to live. Asterion pressed him closer. Then don't. His sun core shattered completely. Every fragment of divine light exploded into Eryx. Chaos collided with order. Darkness collided with sunlight. The void screamed. The cosmic scales broke. The fate's threads snapped one by one. And for one impossible moment, the universe itself seemed to hold its breath. Then silence. Asterion's arms remained wrapped around Eryx. Neither moved, neither breathed. The god stood frozen at the edge of the rift. Hera whispered his name. Nothing. Then a faint heartbeat echoed through the void. Once, twice, and somewhere within Asterion's trembling arms, Eryx's fingers moved. But whether that heartbeat belonged to Eryx or to something entirely new, even the gods did not yet know. Chapter 4. The God Who Bowed. When Asterion opened his eyes, the first thing he felt was warmth. A heartbeat. A familiar heartbeat. His golden eyes opened slowly. For a moment he didn't understand where he was. Then he looked down. Eryx was lying against his chest, solid, alive. Breathing? Asterion stopped breathing. Eryx's violet eyes slowly opened. Sunshine? Asterion stared at him. Then he pulled him into his arms so fiercely that Eryx squeaked. You're crushing me. I don't care. You are literally crushing me. I thought you were dead. Eryx blinked. Apparently not. Asterion buried his face in Eryx's silver-black hair. He breathed him in. Warm, real, alive. For thousands of years, breathing had been something Asterion did without thinking. Now he understood. Eryx was the reason he wanted to breathe at all. Eryx's arms slowly wrapped around him. For once, the beautiful menace didn't make a joke. He simply held him. And Asterion finally let the tears fall. The gods were still standing at the edge of the primordial rift. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. They had watched Asterion sacrifice everything. They had watched Eryx disappear. They had prepared themselves for grief. Then Eryx moved. Hera gasped. Apollo's eyes widened. Dionysus actually dropped his cup. Zeus whispered, Is that really him? Hades stared at the two gods. Then Eryx lifted his head. Why is everyone staring? Silence. Hera was the first to move. She rushed forward and wrapped Eryx in her arms. My little menace. Eryx blinked. Mother Hera? Hera cried harder. Apollo joined next. Then Dionysus. Even Hades placed a hand on Eryx's shoulder. Zeus stood there for several seconds before wiping his eyes angrily. Don't get used to this. Eryx smiled. You missed me. I missed my crown. You missed me. Perhaps a little. Eryx laughed. And that sound, that simple, familiar laugh made every god around them smile. Olympus had its menace back, but Asterion had paid a price. His once golden hair now carried streaks of silver. His divine core had been shattered. His authority was diminished. His power was weaker, and rebuilding it would take centuries. Asterion didn't care, not even a little. He had Eryx. That was enough. They left Olympus and settled in a quiet sanctuary surrounded by olive trees and golden flowers. No throne, no temples, no divine politics, just peace. Eryx needed rest, a lot of it. His body had survived, but the remnants of the cosmic magic still needed time to settle. Asterion stayed beside him through every moment. He cooked for him, read to him, carried him when he became tired. And whenever Eryx disappeared from his sight for too long, Asterion immediately went looking for him. You know I'm not going to disappear anymore, right? Eryx asked one afternoon. Asterion pulled him closer. I know. Then why are you still watching me? Because I like looking at you. Eryx's cheeks turned pink. You're becoming unbearable. I learned from you. Centuries passed. Asterion slowly rebuilt his divine core. His power returned. His golden hair remained streaked with silver. And Eryx became even more troublesome. One afternoon, Asterion found him sitting in the garden. On an ordinary wooden chair, holding a golden apple. Asterion stared. Where did you get that? Eryx smiled innocently. Garden? Hera's garden? Maybe. Eryx. What? You stole it. I prefer the term borrowed indefinitely. Asterion sighed. You haven't changed. Eryx leaned back against him. Nope. Asterion wrapped his arms around his waist. Eryx smiled. Then his expression softened. I heard you declared war on the universe for me. Asterion remained completely serious. I would do it again. Aren't you worried they'll call you soft? No. Asterion buried his face against Eryx's hair. His arms tightened around him. I'll burn the universe down too if anyone tries to take you from me again. Eryx went completely silent. Asterion lifted his head. Eryx? The beautiful menace's cheeks were bright red. His violet eyes refused to meet his. Stop saying things like that. Why? Because... Eryx hit his face against Asterion's chest. I don't know how to annoy you when you're being romantic. Asterion laughed. A real laugh. Warm. Deep, free. And Eryx smiled against his chest. Their marriage happened several years later. Asterion proposed first. Not with a grand ceremony, not in front of Olympus, just beneath the olive tree where Eryx had once forgotten him. Asterion took his hand. I spent thousands of years believing eternity was a gift. Eryx looked at him. Then I learned eternity means nothing if I have nobody to share it with. He knelt. Eryx's eyes widened. Asterion, stay with me. Eryx's lips trembled. For how long? Asterion smiled. Forever. Eryx stared at him. Then immediately started crying. You're unfair. Is that a yes? Eryx laughed through his tears. Of course it's a yes, idiot. Their wedding was the happiest Olympus had seen in centuries. Hera cried. Apollo played music. Dionysus drank enough wine for 10 gods. Zeus gave Eryx an enormous golden crown. Eryx immediately asked if he could keep it. Zeus sighed. Yes. Asterion whispered, Don't encourage him. Zeus looked at him. You married him. This is your problem now. Eryx grinned. Your problem too. Years became decades. Decades became centuries, and the world remained peaceful. Asterion rebuilt his divine strength. Eryx remained gloriously chaotic. The gods stopped fearing his disappearance. Because every morning Eryx was there, laughing, stealing, complaining, calling Asterion sunshine, and Asterion was always there, behind him, beside him, holding him, loving him like breathing air. One evening, Eryx rested against Asterion beneath the stars. Sunshine. Are you happy? Asterion looked at him. His beautiful menace, his impossible miracle, his husband, his forever. More than I ever thought I could be, Eryx smiled, then quietly stole the golden apple Asterion had been eating. Asterion stared at him. Eryx, what? You stole my apple. Eryx grinned. Borrowed indefinitely. Asterion sighed, then pulled him closer. Menace. Your menace. Asterion kissed his forehead. My menace. And somewhere on Mount Olympus Zeus suddenly sneezed. Hera looked toward the gardens. Someone is probably stealing something. A peacock wearing Hermes' sandal walked past them. Zeus closed his eyes. It is Eryx. Hera smiled. Good. Because this time, everyone knew he wasn't going anywhere. And so the greatest war in divine history ended not with blood, conquest, or the fall of Olympus, but with a god choosing love over destiny. A god who once demanded order from the universe, and a beautiful menace who had once believed he was destined to disappear. Somehow chaos taught order how to love, and order taught chaos that he was worth saving. For the first time in his existence, Eryx wasn't living on borrowed time. He was simply living, laughing, loving. causing trouble. And Asterion? He intended to make sure his beautiful menace had eternity to cause it.